President of Public Citizen. Thank you very much for joining us in the latest of our 40th anniversary speaker series. We were founded in 1971 to work to advance health, safety, democracy, and justice. We've had a long focus on activities at the Food and Drug Administration. We're very happy to have Commissioner of the FDA, Dr. Peggy Hamburg, here with us. The program will be a couple introductory remarks by Sid Wolf, who runs our health research group, and then Dr. Hamburg will talk for 20-25 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for back and forth Q&A. We don't have too much time, though, so I want to get right into it. I'll just tell you by way of background about Dr. Hamburg. She's been the commissioner since 2009. Prior to that, she was working at the Nuclear Threat Initiative. She was an assistant secretary at the Department of Health and Human Services in the Clinton administration, and prior to that, among other achievements, made really important innovations in TB prevention policy in New York City. So with that, Sid is going to give a couple remarks, and then Dr. Hamburg.
I will also possibly have a question afterwards. The remarks will be as short as the question. After President Obama was elected, there was a fair amount of energy in the pharmaceutical industry to have as commissioner Janet Woodcock, who has been at the FDA since 1994, if I remember correctly. I actually meet with her regularly after she's been there. And my thoughts were that the reasons behind that were kind of worrisome because she had done a number of things and has continued to do a number of things more recently that are certainly more favorable to the pharmaceutical industry and the public. I was therefore delighted when instead of Dr. Woodcock, Peggy Hamburg was nominated. The FDA, as you all know, is in fact part of the Public Health Service, and there have been too few people at the top positions at the FDA who actually have a background, as Dr. Hamburg has, in Public Health Service, and to be the Health Commissioner of New York, and to deal with the multiple kinds of public health problems that have to be dealt with there is the kind of background that is important, I think, and too few of the FDA commissioners have really had that kind of public health background. So I'm not going to really say very much more other than the fact that, as I said before, I'm glad that she has been commissioner. I hope that she will think about staying for more than the end of this term. That does not need to be the topic of any of my questions or hers, but just it's really a wish. And I think the FDA has been better off with her at the top than it would be with Dr. Woodcock. There'll be questions about Dr. Woodcock for me later. Please welcome Peggy Hamburg.
Well, thank you. And I would just say to begin that the entire selection process was a total mystery to me. And when I got the call asking me to be FDA Commissioner, I really had not had it as a focused discussion, although I'd spoken with people in the incoming Obama administration about various possibilities of rejoining the world of public service, to which I am very committed as a medical and public health professional. And at the end of the day, I really do feel that FDA presents a unique opportunity to really make a difference short-term and long-term. And an agency that I think is really very underappreciated in terms of its critical importance as a public health agency. It's very unique. It's a science-based regulatory agency with a public health mission to promote and protect the health of the public. And I would have to say that even in these very difficult political times, it still is an agency that can get some bipartisan support. But one of the things that I do want to talk about with you is what the changing budgetary and political climate means. But both Orrin Hatch and the much-missed Senator Kennedy are on the record saying that FDA is the most important public health agency in terms of service to the public, and I wholeheartedly agree. Let me begin by thanking Public Citizen and recognizing that this is a speaker series that is celebrating your 40th year and what a contribution this organization has made over those years to protecting health and safety and ensuring the well-being of citizens across this country, and also to thank you for the support given to the FDA. Of course, we haven't always agreed on every issue, and in many instances you wished that we would have done more or done something differently. But I think that the appreciation of the importance of the FDA and the work we do and the support, whether it's for our budget, which is a critical concern and has long been, I think, neglected in terms of the overall investments our country makes in critical areas of government, whether it's supporting a decision that we make that may be controversial to take a drug from the market or whatever, or in so many other important ways, raising awareness and understanding amongst the public about critical issues of health and well-being. Your efforts are much noted and much appreciated, and frankly, we are really looking forward to your continuing efforts because these are challenging times. I don't know how many of you come from a background in health specifically, but I thought it might be useful to begin with just a few words about the FDA and the scope of our responsibilities, maybe speak to a couple of critical sort of realities that shape our work, touch on a couple of concerns, and then leave time for questions, answers, and discussion. To be honest, it was a surprise to me to arrive at the FDA and really fully come to understand the scope of our responsibilities, that we are responsible for addressing safety, effectiveness, and quality of drugs, medical devices, vaccines and biologics, animal drugs as well as human drugs, I might add. We're responsible for the safety of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, dietary supplements, things that emit radiation, and most recently, and quite historically, we now are responsible for the regulation of tobacco products. So we have a lot on our plate and a lot of diverse activities and requirements for quite a vast array of expertise as well. It's striking that we actually regulate products that represent somewhere between 20 and 25 cents of every dollar that consumers spend on products in this country today, and obviously products that really matter. You know, whether it's the food you put on your family's table, or the drugs you take, or the sunscreen you might put on, or the dietary supplement you might take. You know, we really are responsible for things that affect, you know, virtually every American every day in their life, and sometimes in life-saving ways. So we are unique, we are essential, and I think it's really important to understand that unlike some other agencies in government, there aren't other governmental entities, there aren't private sector entities, there aren't academic institutions or not-for-profit organizations that either have the authority or often the expertise to do what we do. So it really does matter, I think, to have a strong, fully functional FDA. And I think, you know, we probably will come back to aspects of that, but this is a critical time in terms of the budget pressures we're all operating under, a critical time in terms of the political environment that we're operating in, and a critical time in terms of the advances in science and technology that can and should enable us to do a better job, and also can and should enable our country to really make sure that we are able to provide safer, and better and more cost-effective products for people who need them and count on them. So let me just talk about three broad areas of focus or concern, and then maybe hone in on a couple of issues, and I hope someone's watching the clock. One critical issue as I came in as commissioner and as I continue to do my work is to bring that public health focus, to really make sure that we're an agency that is focused on outcomes, what matters to individuals and to populations, that we really measure our success by those metrics, that we are focused, first and foremost on preventing problems before they occur, but also responding quickly as problems emerge, bringing the best possible data to bear on decision making, trying hard to balance risks and benefits, often under complex circumstances, and always thinking about the work we do in terms of the importance of partnership and critical stakeholders. Part of that is really addressing issues of trust and confidence in the agency, and I think our history has really been quite mixed. I think if you look overall, FDA is well recognized as an important agency that serves the public, and around the world we're often referred to as the gold standard. But I think especially in times when there's suspicion of government and serious doubts about the value of regulation, FDA is vulnerable, and it's a critical time for us to ensure that the public and policymakers really understand what we do and have trust and confidence in what we do, how we do it, and why. Among many efforts to really address this concern has been our transparency initiative, which I think has been very, very important, really focused on trying to both increase awareness and understanding about who we are and how we do business, also trying to make important information available to the public, trying to use a range of strategies to do that, and to try to better understand stakeholder issues and questions about the agency and respond to those, and also trying to make important components of FDA work more accessible, including more access to data that we use for decision making, whether positive or negative, to help the public understand and to help build on a foundation of existing knowledge in important and powerful ways. Second thing I want to mention is the importance of strengthening science within the walls of FDA and beyond, because as I said, at the end of the day, we have to be a science-based, data-driven agency, and we have to bring the best possible science to bear on what we do. And I think it's a sad reality that, again, over many decades, not a function of any political party or who's in the White House, but an unfortunate fact of history that FDA has not been adequately funded in terms of what we need to be adequately equipped to really address the growing complexity of the science that underlies the products that come before us. And I think there's a broader concern about regulatory science as a part of our overall scientific enterprise that we need to address as well. Clearly, it's a key challenge for us and a huge area of focus for me to make sure that we have the scientists we need within FDA, that we can both recruit and retain them, that we have the resources that they need to do their jobs, that they have the engagement with the broader scientific, medical, and public health community so that they can remain current and engaged, and that we can fulfill the expectations that are upon us to do the really data-based decision-making that we need to do. I also want to just briefly mention the importance of regulatory science, because I have been very struck. It wasn't something, to be honest, I thought about before I became commissioner, but I am very struck as a nation how we invest in biomedical research is incomplete, that there is a critical gap that I talk about as regulatory science, although some have said you better think of a better name, especially now. But you know, I sort of have called it that because that's what it is. It's the knowledge and the tools that enable us to really review and assess the safety, the efficacy, the quality, and the performance of products. It enables us to use the best possible science to really, at the end of the day, make sure that patients and consumers have the products that they need and that they expect, based on what they read about every day in the paper in terms of the investments in science and all of the new extraordinary breakthroughs that are occurring. But I think we have to recognize we are not translating those investments and those opportunities into the real world products that we really hope for. And I think that we need to develop, and it needs to be collaborative. It's not science that FDA can or should do alone. Much deeper knowledge in critical ways that will make a real difference, whether it's understanding genetic and traits and biomarkers so that we can target therapies to make sure that the greatest benefits and greatest safety accrues to patients, whether it's innovative clinical trial design so that we can get robust scientific answers, we get them quicker and at less cost, whether it's really looking at how can we develop the science of safety, not just in the pre-approval process, but across the whole life cycle of a medical product, so that we can really identify and appropriately assess in a timely way emerging safety signals and use the full range of data that's potentially available to us, whether it's data mining from large databases, whether it's adverse event reports, observational data, and epidemiologic data. We really need to develop this science of safety in more concrete ways so that we can apply it to the work that we do. Don't want to talk a lot more about that right now, but it is an important area, and happy to develop it more as we go forward in the question and answer period. I want to talk about one other important reality that I think is underappreciated but hugely important to our citizens here at home, and that is the impact of globalization. The world has changed dramatically since the early days of the FDA, and it's surprising that in so many aspects of the work we do and the authorities we have, it doesn't reflect this really transformative new world that we live in, where we now are responsible for products that are coming from more than 150 countries around the world, 300,000 plus different facilities making products that we regulate and that consumers use here, tens of millions of lines of imports every year, numbers that have been escalating dramatically in the last decade. In the food area, it's striking that about 40% of fresh fruit and produce eaten here comes from other countries, about 80% of seafood. In the drug area, about 40% of drugs that are taken here are made in other countries, and about 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients in drugs taken here come from other countries, in fact mainly China and India, but other countries as well. So the notion that we have a domestic regulatory focus is one that has existed historically and persists in some of our authorities and programs, but the reality is very different, and we have to really think in new ways and develop new programs. Of course, inspections at the border remain an important part of what we do, but we're trying to do it in a more sophisticated, risk-based way to really target the commodities and the producers and manufacturers and distributors that have histories, good or bad, in terms of product safety quality and integrity of the supply chain. But we also have to really develop much more of a global presence. We now have offices in many parts of the world to provide a regional presence, to work with our sister regulatory authorities and with industry and other stakeholders so that they understand our standards and expectations. We work much more closely now than we ever have in the past with our counterpart regulatory authorities in efforts to harmonize standards and approaches, to share information, and in some instances to actually share workload in terms of inspections, etc., and also working with various kinds of international organizations and scientific organizations to try to achieve greater sort of global alliances to address integrity of the supply chain and global product safety. An important component of this as well is efforts to really strengthen regulatory capacity in the developing world, and this is something that excites me very much as an opportunity because I've worked for many years on global health issues. It's in our own vested interest as a nation to make sure that many countries around the world have stronger regulatory capacity because of the vulnerability of the supply chain and the magnitude of the imports coming in. But it also is an important development issue, I believe, because if we can help strengthen the regulatory capacity in developing countries and developing economies, we can help those countries better ensure quality goods and products for their own people. We can help them become stronger as nations by supporting emerging industries in those nations and opportunities for economic development as well. And at the end of the day, it's a security issue for all of us, national and international security, to be able to ensure a stronger and more intact global supply chain for critical products. So I think it is an important area of activity. FDA is doing what it can to help provide technical assistance and support to many countries around the world, and also trying to engage other partners such as the World Bank and USAID in these efforts, because I think they really do matter. Let me just touch quickly on two other things that are really on my mind and worry me, and I want to leave lots of time for Sid's questions and the questions of others. But there are two things that I think this organization in particular should be thinking about and hopefully working with FDA to address. One is that you may be aware of an increasing drumbeat of concerns raised from certain quarters about the FDA as a bureaucratic regulatory agency impeding innovation, innovation of important American industries, the drug and device industry in particular, and therefore not just potentially compromising the ability of important products to get to patients and consumers, but driving up the costs of industry and medical product development at a time of economic recession, potentially driving overseas and undermining U.S. global economic competitiveness. And I think that this discussion is a complex one, and we need to take it very seriously. We need to recognize, I think, that advancing innovation is very important for our nation on many levels, that it's a complex ecosystem. FDA and regulatory issues clearly plays a role, but there's a whole span of issues ranging from intellectual property and patent concerns through economic policies to the underlying investments in science and research to, of course, the role of FDA, both in terms of how we apply that science and our regulatory requirements and our regulatory pathways in terms of business practices and cetera. And of course, issues of reimbursement matter as well in terms of the whole investment cycle, and these issues about the status of innovation in this country. But I think it's also important to recognize that some of this discussion that has become rather heated in certain quarters has the potential to have broader negative implications for regulatory standards and practices. The reality is that if you look at how FDA is doing in the world of innovation, in fact, there are some misconceptions that I think need to be addressed. One is that we are slower than Europe, and we are a drag on the overall system. In fact, the numbers show that in key areas, particularly priority drug review, that we are significantly more rapid than our European counterparts. And in terms of key drugs that have been approved in this country, we are, most often the first to approve a critical new drug to address an unmet public health need. There was an article published in Health Affairs magazine just recently that looked at important cancer drugs, and over a period, I think it was 2003 to 2010, but I can't quite remember. But in looking at the important cancer drugs that have been approved both by the EMA and the FDA, in fact, this leadership role on the part of the United States was very, very clear, and I think speaks, to the question that our systems are not causing this kind of drag on the overall opportunities for innovation and preventing patients from getting critical products that they need. And in the device arena, similar charges have been made. And if you look at industry studies, in fact, for the moderate to lower risk devices, which represent, the huge bulk of the devices that we review, the U.S., in fact, is out in front. Now, we don't want to be in competition with Europe. In fact, we view that collaboration as very, very important, and the more we can work together and really build the science foundation for our decision making in ways that can be collaborative, I think there are huge benefits to be gained. But I mention this because I think that some of this rhetoric and the level of heat associated with it can potentially have negative reverberations in terms of the importance of the FDA's commitment to standards for review. And the numbers of new drugs, the speed of their delivery matters, but the most important foundation of all that we do and what really makes a difference in the near and long term for the American people is that they can have trust and confidence that the products reviewed are reviewed in accordance with science-based standards for safety and efficacy, and that our agency has the commitment to that regulatory oversight process that is unwavering. The other area that I wanted to mention has to do with the role of Congress in many aspects of our work, but most recently as demonstrated in our budget process. For those of you who are FDA budget watchers, first I have to reiterate my thanks for the support that's come from this organization for our budget. We have had significant increases in recent years that have made a difference and have enabled us to strengthen our programs and to bring on board key staff to support our work. And Congress has played an important role in that budget process, and I'm grateful for that, including in 2011 when we were one of a very limited number of agencies that actually got increases in our budget. But the 2012 budget process is underway, and the House, when they voted on our budget, added on some amendments that certainly raised red flags for me, and I want to just briefly mention. One was an amendment saying that we basically couldn't put any more resources into anything that related to RU 486. Another was an amendment that said we couldn't take a regulatory action on a specific product, genetically engineered salmon. Another was an amendment that actually didn't pass, but was the subject of, it didn't ultimately get added on to our budget bill, but it had to do with establishing a criteria that any action that we took had to be based on hard science, which sounds like a good idea, but nobody really knows quite what that means, and it clearly could have very, very concerning implications for our ability to take actions in a whole range of critical areas, and it's very worrisome to me that we would start to see these kinds of potential actions focused on very specific products that would both hinder our ability to address important issues, including important safety issues, might hinder our ability with respect to the RU 486 restriction, for example, to look at a potentially important therapy for other domains apart from its application in terms of reproductive health issues, and activities that might, restrictions that might really limit our ability to build on what is the foundation of all that we do, which is a regulatory process grounded in science, where we review products that come before us with a set of criteria, a dynamic set of criteria, but ones that are really based on a commitment to both the best possible science and the outlook of what is in the best interests of individuals, their families, communities, and the population at large. So why don't I stop there so we have some time for questions and answers. I think I spoke a little bit longer than you might have wished, but it's hard to start talking about FDA issues and not have a lot to say.
That's right. Well, hold on to it, boy. You wish. Let me start with just a couple quick questions, and then we'll go around. And as we do the questions, if you're with an organization or with the media, please identify yourself and your organization. Just two quick things. I mean, on the globalization issue, you've got a very interesting chart in your strategic plan that sort of shows the level of imports going like this and the level of FDA officials dealing with imported products like this. Mindful of that, and also the efforts to build up the regulatory capacity in other countries, do you think it's fair to say that actually this globalization of the food and medicine supply is sort of spun beyond the control of regulators, and we need to sort of tamp it down before we have a chance to catch up and think about really different approaches to handle the problem?
Well, I think that you're not going to be able to change the global trend. I think we have to figure out new ways to address them, and I think it does require some shifts in how we as regulators think and act, and it does require, I think, new levels of partnership and collaboration. It requires really much more of a global alliance of regulators thinking and acting on a global stage than a bunch of national capabilities acting alone. I think it does require, really all nations making a commitment to raise regulatory standards. I think it puts a lot of responsibility on industry to be more accountable, to their consumers, to be more accountable to regulatory agencies. And it certainly requires FDA as an agency really updating both our programs and policies and working with Congress to update some of our authorities so that we can act more effectively in the global world.
One other unrelated. What's your response to proposals for prohibiting direct-to-consumer marketing for at least the first 2 years of the product on the market?
In the drug arena. Well, I think that it is quite clear that the most impact from a marketing point of view comes from the initial introduction of the product and the advertising. And I think, from industry's perspective, they are looking for a system that they're going to do it at all. They want to do it at the beginning of the introduction. The way the system is currently set up, we have a responsibility to review the ads, but it isn't done in a we review the ads, approve them, and then they go up. And I think that does create real challenges for us, especially with limited capacity. And I think that is something to look at. I am hearing more discussion of, within industry about the role of direct-to-consumer advertising. I think it's caused them some headaches, but obviously it also has some real benefits. And I think it's an interesting, important times for more discussion. I have not heard, specific calls for the ban that you were discussing, although I certainly heard it talked about it as a possibility. And I think it's a good time to look at how we do this, because I'm sure we're one of only 2 countries, I think, in the world that do direct-to-consumer advertising of drugs. And I think we clearly are, as industry is doing the investing, but we're all in it together in terms of, there's a lot of energy going into these advertisements. I think the missed opportunity to do something much better if we're going to be talking about drugs and health to the public at large. And certainly one of the discussions that I've been engaged in industry is how can we use some of the time and money that they're putting into this to really address broader public health concerns and broader education of the public about important health issues.
The 2 things that you said that I was most interested in was, one, the idea that we have been the gold standard. There's no question about it. 2,
Yeah.
I've been accused of talking too quiet, so I will talk more loudly. The two things that you said that I just want to focus on for a minute or so are, one, the idea of the FDA as the gold standard. There certainly was a time when the FDA was the gold standard in terms of being faster than many other countries to recognize emerging safety signals. And that was the second thing, your idea of the emerging safety signal. Our work here, as you know, has mainly been on the FDA. It's mainly been on drugs. It's mainly been on drug safety. Over 40 years now, we've asked the FDA to ban 35 drugs. Most of these, about 2/3, are now off the market. And it raises the issue of how quickly does the FDA detect and act on the safety signal. I just want to mention, and I will not take more than a minute or so, just review 3 recent examples of serious problems here. In each of the examples, we asked the FDA to ban the drug. In each of the examples, many people in the FDA thought the drug should be banned. And in each of the examples, another country banned the drug well before, in some cases, the FDA. And in one, the FDA has not yet banned the drug. The 3 drugs are Darvon, a drug that's been in the market for 55 years. We asked the FDA to ban it in 78 and 06, and it was banned in the UK 6 years ago. Between the time the UK banned and when FDA belatedly, late last year, got to ban it, 120 million prescriptions were filled in this country, estimated 1,000 to 2,000 deaths. The second one, the weight reduction drug Meridia, we asked the FDA to ban it in 2002 and again in 2009 when even more evidence of how harmful it was, emerging safety signals, was It was banned in the UK and the EU early in 2010, but the FDA somehow couldn't quite get around to do it, so we had to study it more and so forth, and it was finally banned in the US in October of 2010. Between the time that it was gone in the rest of the world, in the United States, 160,000 prescriptions were filled for it. Clear evidence from randomized trials that this caused a number of deaths. And the third example is a drug that's still in the market, the widely used diabetes drug Avandia. We asked the FDA to ban that in October of 2008, and it was banned in the EU and the UK in September of 2010. The FDA decided not to ban it for reasons which don't make any sense, even though the safety people at the FDA thought it should be banned. And there have been about 500,000 prescriptions filled for this drug since the time of the bans in other countries. So the overall question is, why is this going on? I mentioned before that I was glad that you became Commissioner instead of Janet Woodcock, but she has allowed this stuff to go on, and it clearly represents, when in doubt, go with the industry side. I used to meet with her regularly when she first took over as head of drugs in 1994. She would come here, I would go out there, and I did this for about a year. She's a smart person, and at the end of the year, it was clear that she was uncomfortable regulating. She was uncomfortable taking on the industry. She thought, why can't all these things just be settled on scientific grounds, in other words, on the grounds of the emerging safety signal you're talking about? And she has certainly presided over these three and many other mistakes that have gone on. Fourth one, again, 20 more seconds, I'm done. You can try and answer this. No other country in the world has approved this extra high toxic dose of the most widely prescribed drug for Alzheimer's disease, Aricept. We approved it about a year ago over the objection of everyone in the FDA division, the neurologic drugs division, except the director. The drug does not work really according to the FDA standards that were set, and it causes much more toxicity. Somehow it got approved. Dr. Woodcock and Dr. Katz, who was the head of the drug division, decided to put it on the market. It will probably not go on the market anywhere else. So, if anything, we are causing an emerging safety signal with this drug instead of preventing. So, I guess the overall question is, have you given any consideration to trying to bring in someone other than Dr. Woodcock to run drug safety, or drug CEDAR, not just drug safety? I mean, there have been a number of people in the past. We have not agreed entirely with any of them at all, but she does not turn out to be very good in comparison to many predecessors. Your turn, Dr. Hamburg.
Well, I think, the big issue from my perspective is how do we ensure that we have an adequate focus and capacity to address safety issues within the FDA, and that occurs within the broader context of our overall review and approval of products, as well as addressing the life cycle of these products, as I mentioned. In my view, we have a ways to go. I'm trying to strengthen the safety components of CEDAR, which is what you're mainly addressing, in terms of elevating the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology, which is sort of the hub of the safety issues, make it much more on a par with the Office of New Drug Approval, bring in more expertise, trying to build up the science of safety, as well as I was saying, including engaging the Institute of Medicine to look at some issues with us, but also really trying through a number of different activities to really take a much more serious focused look at how we use different types of data and how we can extend our use of existing data and new ways of collecting data to better inform us about important safety issues. I think the other important piece of any discussion about safety has to also be the question of how do you balance risks and benefits. And I think that we need to really systematize our thinking about that as well. And I think that's a broader discussion than just what does any individual in a leadership role at FDA think, but it's at the end of the day really societal discussion, but it's one where certainly patients and consumers have to have a strong voice as well, because clearly people in different contexts are willing to accept different risks and look at the benefits in different ways, and it's not something that's easy to quantify or apply one cookie-cutter model, but it certainly is an important part of this discussion as well. I also, really do think, we're talking about globalization in the context of the global supply chain, but I think in terms of the analysis of science and how we address certain, critical decisions, the ability to collaborate with other regulatory authorities, as well as the ability to bring in more expertise into the agency, formally or informally, to strengthen our decision-making is also critical. So, I take your point, and, I think it's a very, very, deep concern. And, frankly, it's one of the things that I think may be lost in some of the current debate, and why I raised this issue related to, the discussions that are out there. I was going to say accusations, but about, FDA slowing innovation. I think it's important to understand that we have an important role. I view it as a key component of the FDA's mission to help bring important advances in medical products to people who need them, and to support innovation in every way that we can, mindful, though, of our important role in examining, evaluating, and doing everything we can to assure both safety and efficacy. And I think that in some of the discussion, particularly, as we've been talking about FDA efforts to really examine and reform aspects of our device regulatory processes, including the 510(k) process, but also pre-market approval. I think that the recognition that there are important safety issues that need to be addressed, as well as addressing speed of approval, is very, very important. And I think your voice historically has been a powerful one, and I assume that it will continue to be so.
Just two quick comments. One, other people have questions. One, we've never gone after a drug with any unique benefit at all. Every single drug of the 30 products I mentioned before has not been at least unique, except for its risk. And you talk about collaborating with other governments. These are drugs that have been usually, particularly the last few years, banned first by another government. Same, unless one believes that the population in this country is more resistant to being killed by these drugs. We have the evidence for that. Why is it that these countries that we are trying to collaborate with get it before we do? Emerging safety signals. And, the other issue of the breakthrough important drugs, we have really never gone after, with maybe one exception in 40 years, any of these. And the FDA does do a better job. You're right about the intervals quoted to the Health Affairs Medicine. It's like two different worlds. One, important new drugs that have a unique advantage, and the other is the majority of drugs that a company wants to get in with the cholesterol and sugar. So I just think that I hope you will consider, without necessarily talking any more about it here, the problem with Dr. Woodcock. She does not look very good, and what has happened in the last few years makes her look even worse. And I please welcome other questions.
Hi, thanks. Emily Walker with MedPage today. Just to follow up on what you were talking about, increasing drumbeat on the device side. Dr. Sharon has said before, he said that FDA could do some things better to be a little faster. For instance, there's a lot of turnover with investigators and people who are going back and forth to the device companies, so that they could do something to retain them more. What are your thoughts on what the FDA could do in that area?
Well, I think it has to be a partnership. I think that when you look at where we are and where we can and should be, there's a lot to be done. I think FDA has the responsibility to take a very serious look at our business processes and how we're organized to do business. And the device industry is a complicated one because it has both very large players and very small businesses, and particularly for small business, I think the FDA regulatory landscape can be difficult to understand and to navigate, and that we need to recognize that we can provide more clarity and transparency of how we do things and why. I think there are some key areas that really make a difference that we're committed to working on. One is more engagement early on and throughout the review process in terms of making it clear what our standards and expectations are in terms of data and review, answering questions, etc. Having reviewers with adequate training and an adequate management oversight, and there the recruitment and retention challenges are very real, and it is in the device program that we have the highest rates of turnover. I think we also really do want to invest in additional training for our reviewers that will help with consistency and predictability in terms of the review process. I think we also want to find ways to bring in the right expertise. Devices are getting much more complex in many ways, and can span quite a broad range of science and technology. So we need to make sure that we have ways to use experts in as informed a way as possible. We also are very committed to having standards for the use of science and data within CDRH that are clear and transparent, and Dr. Shuren has created a science council within CDRH for addressing some of the important issues about, in certain circumstances, what kind of data should be required, and looking particularly in the areas of emerging science and technology, how to provide that more responsibly and reliably. On the other hand, there are issues about the quality and consistency of the applications that come before us. And you look at the device applications, and a very high percentage of the applications that we see are for companies where this is the first device that they've ever brought before FDA for review. And so it's not surprising that they don't always have an application that reflects what it needs to have in it, and that they may not understand, some of the expectations. But it's very important, if we're going to be able to review those applications in a timely way, that we get complete applications that are responsive to our requirements. So we need to work with industry, and they need to step up to the plate in that regard. But I think the good news is that there's a fairly clear blueprint for action in some key areas. The question is whether FDA will have the resources and support that we need to get some of this important work done.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up on that? Why is the turnover so much higher at CDRH, in your opinion? And are most of the reviewers who are leaving being hired by the device industry?
Well, it's interesting. I understand that actually the picture looked sort of similar in Cedar not so many years ago, but I think that as we developed a stronger program through the user fee program and really consolidated certain ways of doing things and had a more adequately resourced program, then frankly the work environment got better and people weren't stretched in a million ways. I mean, the same people that were asking to review proposals that are being asked to develop guidance is one of the things that the device industry is clearly asking for, and on the drug side it's also a common theme. We'd like more guidance to help us better understand how to do the research and development work before we bring proposals to you, and how we can expect that you're going to review proposals. But it's very hard to do all of those things at the same time, and the ability to adequately train people and have the appropriate management structure empower the review team, make the difference in the quality of work life for those reviewers. And I think if we can build those systems in a stronger, more robust way, we will be able to address many of the recruitment and retention issues. The more embattled FDA becomes and the more difficult the work environment, the harder it will be to recruit and retain as well. So that's another reason why I'd like to see the tone of some of the discussions get a little less heated and a little more focused on what do we really need to do and how can we get that important work done.
So we're very tight on time. Let's see if we can rush you just a couple. Mike.
Mike Crone from Public Citizen Health Research Group. I had a question that relates to some of my prior work in the Office of Human Research Protection and relates to your issue about globalization. A little over a year ago, the HHS Inspector General issued a report raising concerns about the adequacy of FDA's oversight of clinical trials in foreign countries. And among the concerns they raised was that FDA inspected less than 1% of clinical trial sites in foreign countries. I wanted to know, since that report was issued, what steps has FDA taken to strengthen its oversight of clinical trials in foreign countries?
Well, a very important question, and you know, it is a piece of this bigger globalization puzzle because, sad to say, in every domain of our international activities, we are not able to be as responsive to the demands of the work because there's just a volume that's extremely hard to get on top of, and I would be extremely naive to believe that even in a better budget climate we would actually get the full resources that we need to get the numbers and the oversight up to where we need it to be. And that is where this partnership really does come in, that many of the clinical trials that are being done overseas are collecting data for submissions that will occur to other regulatory authorities as well. So we have a shared interest in working together to both try to put in place programs to enhance the knowledge and understanding and capabilities of many of these countries to do better clinical trials that are in accordance with our good clinical practice standards and guidelines, and also to, in terms of the inspection and the actual oversight of specific clinical studies, we have opportunities to work together in new ways. I think we also have to really raise the level of accountability on industry and on the organizations that are conducting the clinical trials. It is a real challenge, and the variability in quality is very, very real. I also think it speaks to another issue that's on the agenda. FDA plays a role, but it's a bigger question about how can we encourage more clinical trials to be done in this country. There's a reason that many clinical trials are done in other countries. Often that's where the patient populations are, for one thing. But some of it is studies to a considerable degree. If we could also look at, are there ways that we could support clinical trial research and networks for clinical trials more effectively and meaningfully in this country?
Let's see if we can get a set up of one, and then here. So just let's do you, and then 1, 2, 3. We'll do.
Okay. Linda Bush with Inside Health Policy. Kind of dovetailing a little bit off what Dr. Wolf was saying. Can you talk a little bit about, with the restructuring of leadership, what Dr. Silver will be doing and kind of how that will affect the center directors now that there's a level of management between them and yourself?
Well, the reorganization that was announced now, I guess, 2 weeks ago, was an effort to really try to achieve a couple of goals. One was to streamline the Office of the Commissioner and really try to organize the FDA more explicitly around critical areas of function and responsibility, and sort of creating what has increasingly been called a directorate model, but bringing in the case of Dr. Spielberg's new role, the medical product centers together with a deputy commissioner who will be providing oversight and support for their work. It doesn't create an extra layer because there is now not a principal deputy as there was before. It's sort of a model, instead of having a commissioner and a principal deputy who are both stretched too thin across the whole span of responsibilities. It's really saying, let's organize around the key areas of scientific and professional activity and make sure that there's a level of management that has the right scientific and subject matter expertise. I see that very much as, for the Deputy for Medical Products, as a coordinating role, an effort to really address some cross-cutting concerns, because increasingly we're seeing products come before the agency that don't fit into one or another of the center stovepipes, so to speak. Whether it's companion diagnostics for therapeutic interventions or combination products that are both a device and a drug, or in areas like biosimilars that span CBER and CEDAR. There's a whole range of areas and emerging areas where we really need to think in a more integrated, coordinated way, and Dr. Spielberg will be asked to really take the lead on looking at some of those programs and policies. He also will now take on responsibility for overseeing some of the smaller offices that were directly in the office of the commissioner that very much relate to activities within the various centers, orphan drugs, pediatric therapeutics, combination products. And hopefully he will be able to serve as a wise and informed professional with strong background in science and medicine as important activities are underway within the centers, but he will not be directly managing the work of the centers, and in those ways the centers will remain distinct entities, and of course the centers operate under very different legal regulatory frameworks as well in many instances. So it's not the first step in actually merging all of those centers into one mega medical product activity, but it's to try to really ensure, as I think the reality of the world today requires us that there's more collaboration, integration, and recognition of very cross-cutting